A dead person once might be given one final meal, not to feed them, but to feed their sins to someone else. In parts of Wales and the western borderlands of Britain, old accounts describe a custom now known as sin-eating. The surviving evidence is scattered. Some of it comes from antiquarians, local memories, and later folklore collections. So historians treat the details carefully. But the basic idea is chillingly simple. When someone died, a living person could be brought to the house. Food and drink were offered. Often it was bread, sometimes with ale or another drink. The sin-eater consumed it as a symbolic act. By eating, he was believed to take on the sins, burdens, or unsettled wrongs of the dead. To modern ears, it sounds like superstition from a dark corner of the past. But to the people who used it, death was not just a medical event. It was a spiritual crisis inside the home. A person might die suddenly. They might die without confession. They might leave debts, quarrels, or fears behind them. Families worried not only about burial, but about the soul's peace. Official Christian teaching had its own answers for sin, forgiveness, and salvation. Sin-eating sat uneasily beside that world. It was not a neat church ceremony. It was something more local, more domestic, and more uncomfortable. The strangest detail is not that food was involved. Many cultures feed mourners, place food near the dead, or hold wakes around the body. The strange part is who ate, not the grieving family, not the priest. A marginal figure, often described as poor, someone paid a small amount, then left carrying a terrible, invisible burden. The custom reveals something easy to forget. In earlier communities, guilt was not always treated as private. Fear could be shared. Shame could become ritual. Even sin could be imagined as something that moved from one body to another. And once a community believed that one question became deeply practical: who would agree to eat it? The strangest part of sin-eating was not the bread, but the silence around the person paid to eat it. There was no single rule book for the custom. The accounts that survive do not all agree. In some descriptions, bread and drink were placed on or near the body. In others, the sin-eater sat nearby, ate the food, and performed a short prayer-like act. The setting was usually intimate. A house, a body prepared for burial, family or neighbours. Close enough to witness the moment, the atmosphere would not have felt theatrical, it would have felt urgent. Death in a village was not hidden away. It happened in rooms people knew. The dead might remain at home before burial. Visitors came, food was served. Prayers were said. Memory, fear, religion, and local habit all mixed together. Into that room came the sin-eater. He was not usually a respected holy man. Later descriptions often present him as poor, isolated, or socially suspect. That may partly reflect the way later observers judged the custom, but the pattern is important. The work was necessary enough to request, and shameful enough to despise. The family wanted relief. The dead person needed peace, at least in the minds of those who believed the ritual mattered. The sin-eater took payment, sometimes only a coin or a meal, and left with the stain no one else wanted. This made the custom both practical and cruel. It gave mourners something to do with fear. It turned spiritual anxiety into a visible action. Someone had come, something had been eaten, a burden had been transferred. But the person who made that comfort possible could become a warning figure. A man people called when needed, then avoided afterward. That tension is what makes sin-eating so revealing. It was not simply a bizarre belief. It was a social mechanism. It gave a community a way to handle bad deaths, unfinished lives, and the terrifying thought that the dead might not be at rest. And like many old customs, it survived because it answered a question people were afraid to ask aloud. What happens if someone dies still carrying too much? But as the world around death changed, The sin-eater's place began to disappear. By the time Britain entered the modern age, the sin-eater had become less like a neighbour and more like a ghost story. The custom did not vanish in one dramatic moment. Customs rarely do. They thin out. They become embarrassing. They survive in remote places, then in memories, then in stories, told as proof that the past was strange. Several forces likely pushed sin eating toward disappearance. Church authorities had reasons to distrust it. The idea that one person could absorb another person's sins did not fit comfortably with formal Christian teaching. Ministers might see it as improper, superstitious, or spiritually dangerous. Daily life was changing too. Funerals became more formal. Undertakers took on roles once handled by families and neighbours. Death slowly moved from the centre of household ritual into a more managed public system of certificates, services and professional care. Belief changed as well, not everywhere at the same speed. And not in a simple straight line, but the older world of local rights and inherited fears was increasingly challenged by schooling, religious reform, medical authority, and modern respectability. A custom like sin-eating depended on a very specific kind of community. People had to believe the act mattered. They had to know who to call, and they had to accept the uncomfortable bargain at its heart: peace for the dead, stigma for the living. One man from Rattling Hope in Shropshire. Richard Munslow, who died in the early 20th century, is often described in local tradition as one of the last sin-eaters. Whether he was literally the last is impossible to prove. That is usually how vanished customs end, not with a clean final date, but with uncertainty. Someone remembers a name, someone points to a village, someone says it happened here once. The payoff is not that people in the past were foolish. It is that they lived much closer to death and they built rituals for fears. Modern life often hides. Sin-eating disappeared because the world that required it disappeared. But the memory remains powerful because it asks a question. History never quite buries. If grief could be lifted by a ritual, who would carry it away?